Thanks for being here on this Wednesday evening. So I'm Dr. Leo Millian-Hodges, and I serve as the Director of the School of Communication Center for Communication Research. And it's my pleasure, in a moment, I'm going to get to introduce Dr. Stacey, Connaughton, who is our visiting scholar. First, this visit is also co-sponsored by our Center of Ethics, and Dr. Sandy Borden is going to say a couple words on their behalf.
Thank you. So welcome everybody. We're happy to co-sponsor this event. And I just wanted to draw your attention to a few materials outside the door. If you care to, for example, to sign up for our email list, we'd love to have you. We also have several book clubs running this semester that you're welcome to join. And a full slate of events for a lecture series. Our next one is coming up on the 22nd. It's part of the Lee Honors College's Lyceum series. It's at 12 p.m. in the Lee Honors College Lounge. The title is How to Take on Hate, a dialogue on Islamophobia and racism. And the speakers are Asha Noor of the National Network for Arab American Communities and Elisa Perkins, who's on the faculty of Comparative Religion here at Western. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Leah. Thanks.
So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our speaker and all of the amazing things that she's been doing throughout her career so far. So Dr. Connaughton is an associate professor and associate head of school at the Brian Lamb School of Communication at Purdue University. Her research examines leadership and identification in geographically distributed context, particularly as these issues relate to virtual teams, organizations, political parties, and peace building. Dr. Connaughton also serves as a project director and principal investigator of the Purdue Peace Project, an externally funded initiative that seeks to reduce and enhance what is known about how to reduce the likelihood of political violence in West Africa. More specifically, the Purdue Peace Project convenes everyday citizens to help them address immediate threats of violence in their communities. The project team continually monitors and evaluates projects to maximize impact. Then they share their experience and best practices with practitioners and scholars around the world. Under the leadership of Dr. Connaughton, the Purdue Peace Project is committed to its data-driven, locally led approach to peace building, its evidence-based results in preventing political violence, and doing research and practice and having impact in both areas. In addition to her pioneering work with the Peace Project, Dr. Connaughton's research has been supported by the NSF, the Carnegie Corporation, and the Russell Sage Foundation. She's also facilitated workshops and written guidebooks in the areas of virtual teams, leadership, team building, and strategic planning in the US, Canada, and China. In tonight's presentation, entitled Organizing to Prevent Violence and Build Peace, the Transformative Potential of Everyday Citizens in West Africa and Central America, Dr. Connaughton will explore a topic that holds relevance for all of us as students, researchers, teachers, and practitioners of communication. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Stacey Connaughton.
First of all, let me see if you all can hear me okay. Yeah? Even all the way in the back row. Yeah, we're good. All right, excellent. All right. Well, it is indeed a pleasure to be with you all this evening, and I want to thank especially the students. I have a hunch there was a little enticement for you to be here, yeah? But I also really appreciate that you took up your profs on that offer, yeah? And I will try to make it a little entertaining for you this evening, right, as we go through this together. Let me, though, begin by thanking some people who were really instrumental in giving me the privilege of being here this evening. First of all, of course, Dr. Leah, who I've heard goes by Dr. O here at WMU, yeah, for extending the invitation to join you all. Of course, that invitation could not have been extended without the support of Dr. Ford, the director of the School of Communication, and Dr. Sandy Borden, right, the director of the Ethics Center. I also want to particularly thank the students who I've had the great pleasure of meeting so far on my visit. The graduate students and the undergraduate students both. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and you all have taught me more about this approach through your comments about it, and so I really genuinely thank you very much for that. I have to give a special shout out to Siobhan and Deb in the School of Communication because they have been absolutely terrific in making me feel very welcome. A special hello to Associate Dean Keeper, who I saw speaking back there. I have the great pleasure of working with the Associate Dean's daughter right now at Purdue in various ways. And Lauren is such a gem. As is Catherine, right? Your other daughter over in, Speech and Hearing Languages Sciences, right? Who we fund in COM 114, our basic public speaking, and they're both fantastic. So thank you for encouraging them to go to your alma mater. And then also just a genuine hug to Kristen Hatton, who is right down here in the front. And if any of you have not yet taken a course with Dr. Hatton, I really encourage you to do that. Not only because I had the great privilege of working with her when she was a grad student at Purdue as a master's and PhD student, but she is one of the most gifted instructors that I have ever known with a true dedication to students. So I really encourage you. She's in yellow right here. All right. But tonight, I will share some examples of transformation. They are transformation of individuals, groups, and communities, transformation of discourses and action, transformation made possible through close collaboration between everyday citizens in West Africa and researchers in the United States. They're changes in perceptions of oneself and of other people. They're shifts in belief about whether or not a group of unlikely collaborators can actually collaborate with one another. There are shifts in public and private discourses about who can and who should get to participate in the design of peace-building efforts, whether they be political violence prevention or the prevention of the Ebola virus. The transformations I will talk about this evening have taken place and are continuing to take place. What's more, as I hope you appreciate, those transformations are led, designed, and implemented by local, everyday citizens. At first blush, even the idea that these transformations could be possible might have seemed a little impossible to some, at least highly unlikely. These are everyday citizens in Liberia who on average make about $400 per year and who are still recovering from 14 years of brutal civil war. They are Ghanaians who have seen inflation soar and electricity drop. They are Nigerians who listen as the international media depicts their nation as one that is characterized by the Boko Haram's violence in the north and armed kidnappings in the south. These are everyday citizens who live in countries with colonial legacies, histories that continue to influence them in many ways. The ways in which they live, the macro discourses that organize their lives, the ways in which they think of themselves and their own identities, and the ways in which they interact with fellow citizens and with foreign visitors. It involves groups of people who have willingly self-organized at the local community level through the opening of discursive space, and by allowing themselves to imagine possibility of working side by side and having genuine dialogue. These are citizens who have become actors in social change. They're everyday citizens who, as you'll hear in a few moments, think of themselves now as ambassadors for peace. This evening, I would love for us to consider two major points. Number one, everyday citizens can lead and affect social change in profound ways. Second, conflict and tension actually have transformative potential. Now, these are not necessarily new claims. They have been theorized in the West. However, they have emerged in my work in West Africa as well, and given that context, I think it's important for us to reconsider them. Both claims, I would argue, as a communication scholar, centralize the communicative. For one, embedded in each of those claims is the notion that communication is a meaning-making activity. Second, the claim invites us to consider the relationship of discursive openings and action. Third, they may encourage us to consider the potential for honest, seemingly destructive interaction to actually pave the way for meaningful relationship building and transformation. And they demand that we pose the question about who should be invited to participate in the construction of one's own destiny and one's own country's present and future. I would like to begin tonight, though, with a story, one that is both professional and highly personal. It is, after all, a story that champions asking the question, what if? And imagines what could and maybe what should be possible. I invite you to step back with me in time to September 2011. I was at home one evening around 8 o'clock at night when my phone rang, and lo and behold, on the other end of the line was my then Associate Dean, Dr. Mohan Datta, shown in the middle of the slide. He wanted to know if I would meet with an alumnus, a chemical engineering alum who had graduated Purdue quite a few years before. Mr. Milton Lowenstein, who you see pictured on the left here. At that time, Mr. Lowenstein was 85 years old. Dr. Datta told me that he'd been meeting with Milt, right, conversing about the idea of possibly establishing a political violence initiative at Purdue, and about a collaboration with the College of Liberal Arts to develop an initiative that would both, in and of itself, help to prevent political violence, but then also build knowledge about political violence prevention. Milt would fund that initiative. Given that one of our college's missions is to promote global social change, that potential collaboration made sense to me. However, what did not make sense to me, and still in some ways does not, is why was he calling me? After all, I was a professor in communication who up until that point, as you heard Leah talk about, had been doing work in leadership in virtual contexts. I had never stepped foot in West Africa before. And although in my work I oftentimes attend to issues of culture and to the political writ large, I was in no means an expert in peace building. And I told Dr. Datta that on the phone. But he said, as I think good associate deans often do, he said, just take the meeting. I am very, very glad that I took that meeting. That conversation with Milt would not only become a career-altering conversation, but a life-changing conversation. I listened as Milt, then 85 years old, passionately described his vision of helping to reduce armed conflict in the world. He discussed work that he had funded in Guinea-Bissau, also in West Africa, that had contributed to violence prevention during elections. And he specifically noted that that work had been led by local people. The ideas for what would be effective strategies for preventing violence had come from within local communities, not from quote-unquote outside experts, and that those efforts did not require substantial monetary investment. He sought to support additional work that could show measurable impact and would contribute to new knowledge. This new initiative would be driven by local people and would be codified so that the knowledge they helped us generate could help others learn how to reduce political violence. As a leadership scholar, I was captivated by his vision. To me, it embraced the small d democratic notion that local citizens like us have the agentic power, the potential to exhibit leadership and enact social change. And it embraced Ernest Boyer's argument that the academy, the university, can simultaneously contribute to new knowledge and also help to better the human condition. Out of that conversation emerged the Purdue Peace Project. The Purdue Peace Project's mission is what you see here. We convene and work with local citizens in fragile states in order to help reduce the likelihood of political violence in communities. Political violence is a pressing social problem. Violent armed conflict touches the lives of human beings around the globe. In fact, according to the International Strategic Studies Institute for Strategic Studies, 167,000 human beings lost their lives in 2015 due to armed violent conflict. Indeed, the Global Peace Index reports that in June 2016, only 10 countries in the entire world could claim to be violence-free. Since our inception in January 2012, we have collaborated with citizens in Ghana, Liberia, and Nigeria, and most recently in El Salvador. We have facilitated dialogic spaces that, in turn, have led to citizen-designed and citizen-led actions that have empirically been shown to help contribute to the prevention of political violence. To do this requires a very dedicated team. And in assembling this team, some of you have heard me talk about this before, I followed one of the principles that my father taught me when I was growing up, and that which also has been borne out in research on leadership and teams. That is, assemble a group of people who have your overall purpose in common with you, but who also bring unique talents and unique perspectives to the table. I'm fortunate to be working with a dynamic, talented group of individuals on this initiative. In January 2012, we hired a woman named Rosalind Obengo-Fori to serve as our West African program manager. Rosalind is Ghanaian. She was instrumental in helping lay the foundation for this work in all of West Africa. Sadly, this past October, we lost her very unexpectedly to heart failure at the all too soon age of 59. But the lessons that she taught us, that she's inspired within us, continue to go on. And they go on in the minds and the hearts of the people you see here. Grace Yemi, who's the second from the left on the top, is our Liberia country director based in Liberia. Yaganoma Batukuo is our Ghanaian country director, the third from the left on the top, based in Ghana. Lilia Yakova, who's Bulgarian originally, the first on the top on the left, is our Associate Director of Operations based at Purdue. And on the very far right on the left is our consultant with a steep background in peace building and development work based in Boston, Jessica Burns. I'm also really fortunate to work with a dynamic group of students at Purdue, and they are listed on the bottom there, shown on the bottom there. Among them are former journalists, PR strategists, industry representatives, some with international experience, some without, from varied theoretical positions and perspectives with expertise in quantitative and qualitative methodologies. All of them share a commitment to PPP's overall purpose. And I have to do a special shout out to this one right here, Jennifer Protasek, because guess what? She is one of you all, right? She graduated from this program with her master's degree. We are also extremely fortunate to continue to get guidance from people who have once been graduate students at Purdue. Yeah? And so you see here a mirage of individuals from multiple countries around the world, right? Including Nigeria, China, India, most recently from Kenya, Slovenia, and of course from the United States. We are also extremely fortunate to have the support of top administration at Purdue, our Dean David Reinbold of the College of Liberal Arts, and my school head, Dr. Mary Fran Matson. This support at Purdue is important. However, it is the citizens in country who are the driving force behind the Purdue Peace Project and our approach to political violence prevention. Remember the first point that we made tonight. Everyday citizens can lead and affect social change in profound ways. And we argue that they should be the driving forces of peace-building efforts worldwide. Lisa Search has defined peace-building in this way. She says it's a wide range of efforts by diverse actors in government and civil society at the community, national, and international levels to address the immediate impacts and root causes of conflict. before, during, and after violent conflict occurs. The peace-building field is indeed made up of a host of international actors, humanitarian groups, some international, some domestic, funders that oftentimes are from outside of the affected regions, sometimes from inside, and community groups, some that are formal, some that are informal, such as religious groups and youth groups. Academics are also part of that peace-building space. In fact, the individual that many believe is the father of the peace-building field is a gentleman named Dr. John Paul Lederach, who's at Notre Dame. Researchers in academic units and research institutes across the world have wanted to study peace building. The Purdue Peace Project contributes to that space, we hope, by emphasizing what some have called engaged communication scholarship. That is, we strive to do both action and research. In fact, in our work with local collaborators, together we build new knowledge, and we are all dedicated to action and research. In practicing engaged scholarship, we aim to do some of the things you see on this slide. We focus on issues of practical and social import. We practice ongoing reflexivity about our own actions and our own privileges in this world. We try to uphold equitability in our relationship with our collaborators, and we seek to inspire the co-production and co-ownership of knowledge. Based on our collaborations in West Africa, we are developing what we're now calling the relationally attentive approach to conducting engaged communication scholarship. You'll hear me talk a little bit about that later on. But as communication scholars David Siebold and Jennifer Simpson once told us, high-quality engaged scholarship is always theory-driven. So the kind of things that you all are studying in your classes really, really does matter. PPP's locally led approach is inspired by scholarly work on dialogue. Work from that body says that dialogue oftentimes is tense. It's oftentimes conflicting, right? It's messy. But in the end, it can also be quite transformative. It is also inspired by work that underscores leadership as a small d democratic process and highly communicative, suggesting that any of us, regardless of our station in life, can exhibit leadership. Moreover, we believe that local citizens have the potential and the knowledge and the expertise to contribute in meaningful ways to peace building. In fact, we see our role as PPP researchers as one of participating with local actors in the co-construction of knowledge and social change. To date, as I mentioned, we have done collaborations with local citizens on 16 projects in the countries that you see here: Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, and now El Salvador. Those projects have involved everything from election-related violence to land disputes, to chieftaincy disputes or leadership disputes, to issues over who controls natural resources, such as oil and water. In each of our projects, we try to test this theory of change that you see here. If we bring together an inclusive and representative group of local citizens and create the space together in which they can engage in genuine dialogue with one another, they will identify and implement effective strategies for preventing violence. Representative and inclusive for us draws on aspects of Stan Dietz's multiple stakeholder model of decision-making. We add another dimension, and that is that citizens will participate voluntarily, and through voluntary participation on issues of civic import to them, they will demonstrate commitment over time. By genuine dialogue, we mean something like this: a joint enterprise of genuine meetings in which people co-develop explanations and options by probing their underlying assumptions and the reasons for why these assumptions operate as they do. We see dialogue fundamentally as communicative, as about relationship building, and about listening, genuinely listening. And we seek to continue discussion, sometimes valuing instability and tension in those discussions, and temporarily trying to resolve issues with a willingness to always reopen the possibility of conversation. Dialogue for us aims to transform the conversation by focusing on presumptions that people bring to situations and by creating something additive that people never imagined in the first place. That is why we'd agree with Stan Dietz when he argues that dialogue can sometimes be an impetus for action. This theory of change embodies what has come to be known in the peace-building field as locally led peace-building, and we embrace it. We are privileged to be a part of a working group of practitioners from Africa, Asia, Latin America, the US, and the UK, who all together have defined local peace-building as you see here, an approach in which the people involved in and most affected by violent conflict work together to create and enact their own solutions to prevent, to reduce, and or transform the conflict with the support, and this is really key, you all, with the support they desire from outsiders. You will understand why we embrace this approach when you listen to one of our local collaborators, and Dr. O, thankfully, is going to help me with the technology. This is Zeze, a local peace builder of ours with whom we collaborate from Liberia.
I think that instead of going to exile again, I must play my part in working with whatever group that we can have peace. We went to Connaughton, and on the bomber hour, there's a community there, what we call Sakibu. We expected to talk with like 100, I think, but we had over 500. Can you imagine? We were overwhelmed. It was my very, very amusing moment in Purdue this one. It was very, very, very encouraging, and it really gave me that courage, that zeal, that yes, indeed, I must work in order to maintain peace and stability in my country. The workings of the network actually encouraged me to really put more time to build peace. In my community, wherever I go now, I almost say like a peace ambassador. I see people making conflict. I say, you know that conflict is not good for our country. Please, and we found peaceful resolutions to solving our problem. Violence cannot help us. So I'm going around making peace now. People call me peace ambassador. So I'm very happy to reflect peace that way, and also to Purdue, because it was the backing of Purdue, this idea that really caused me today to be like a peace ambassador, working for my country. How best can we have a stable environment? In a stable environment, you can make your life. But once you have violence, there is no way that you can work or achieve anything of importance once you have a community that is not stable. The message I have from my fellow Liberians is just one word: peace.
That is Zeze, and let me then show you what our approach looks like. Yeah, that Zeze and others together with us embrace. Looks something like this.
Although we were like the Barcelona did a war, but we experienced so many things running around into other countries and becoming refugees is very difficult. We want to live at peace. We know what the past times have brought us in our country. So we are involved.
We're good. So here's our approach in practice, everybody.
Conflict show violent conflict in all corners of the world. What can be done to prevent this violence? How can people inside conflict zones, working with researchers at Purdue University, make a difference? This is how the Purdue Peace Project promotes lasting peace in West Africa and Central America. Together with local citizens on the ground, we identify conflicts like tensions over natural resources, inter-ethnic disputes, or friction around elections. Each of these team visits communities multiple times, learns from them about their context, and determines their openness to collaboration. We create space for dialogue that includes all groups affected by a conflict. Out of these intense dialogues comes a range of ideas and a group of leaders who act for peace in their community. We call this group a local peace committee, and we've seen committees do creative work that's making a true difference. For example, reuniting communities in Nigeria after a long-standing dispute over land, bridging intense ethnic and religious divides in Ghana, and being one of the first groups to spread Ebola awareness and violence prevention messages in Liberia. We take the science of monitoring and evaluation seriously, as do our local collaborators. Together, we document our work, systematically measure our impact over time, and share what we've learned. We're the Purdue Peace Project, promoting peace through local action.
All right, so with this approach, using this approach, local citizens have helped resolve a 13-year chieftaincy dispute in Ghana. They have initiated conversations with the Nigerian government to settle a decade-long land dispute in southern Nigeria. Local citizens have led a systematic grassroots attempt, in fact, one of the first, right, that was targeting Ebola, when Ebola was a devastating virus that affected Liberia. And local citizens are now helping to prevent violence between Muslims and Christians in northern Ghana. The two examples that I will talk a little bit about tonight celebrate everyday people in West Africa who work tirelessly to make their communities and nation-states peaceful. These are concrete examples of what we called earlier locally led peace building. Each of these examples showcases local citizens achieving measurable results. Yet while we seek to make these success stories visible tonight, we do not do so in a boastful or self-congratulatory manner. And that's a really important point. Toward that end, I am happy to talk about the multiple failures, right, that I have had and our team has had in trying to instill this approach in our hearts and souls. So ask me during Q&A. But for now, let's journey to central Ghana, to a region called Brong-Hafo, and a city which I will call tonight Bonoman. The threat of violence there stemmed from a dispute between royal families about how the successor to the deceased paramount chief had been and should be decided. The dispute had simmered for 12 years by the time we became aware of it. Chiefs are agents of development in Ghana. Without a legitimate chief for several years, this city's education and every development effort they tried had been adversely affected. The people refused to work with the then chief because he had not been legitimized by the community, nor had he gone through the traditional system of receiving approval. The Purdue Peace Project learned of the chieftaincy dispute in early 2012, and our preliminary research did indicate that political violence was imminent because there were indicators that the two disputing factions would use that chieftaincy dispute to augment trouble during the 2012 presidential and parliamentary elections. It was therefore imperative, the locals believed, that something be done to resolve the dispute as soon as possible. After relevant parties said they were willing to engage, the Purdue Peace Project convened a 2-day after meeting, which consisted of Queen Mothers, women leaders, religious leaders, youth, representatives of the royal families, and opinion leaders. There were 25 people present at that first meeting. Importantly, from these discussions emerged this group that you see here, an 8-member local peace committee, which I'll call the BPC. The BPC is representative of all of those groups you heard me articulate before, and they met regularly to enact the strategies that came out of that after meeting. In essence, they self-organized. Here were some of the strategies that they developed and put into action after the after meeting until September 2013. And here it is very, very important to again note that they were not advocating for a particular person as their next chief, right? But rather that the traditional judicial system reach a decision on the dispute. So they engaged in advocacy with key actors through interpersonal communication. They engaged in advocacy through media messages, local, regional, national radio outreach, doing interviews themselves for radio and print media, social media postings, earned media coverage of their activities, etc. They organized themselves to be present along with other community members at judicial hearings over a 12-month span. And they engaged in lots of outreach programs to local schools, to churches, to homes. They mobilized community through football, through soccer, right? Through sports, and through women's groups. The PPP's research team then worked very carefully with them to closely monitor what impact those strategies were having and its reach. To evaluate our efforts, we conducted what we might call on-the-street interviews with everyday community citizens at 4 points in time. We conducted focus groups with members of that peace committee to evaluate their process over time. All of those interviews were recorded, of course, with permission and transcribed, and we did a thematic analysis of those data. Importantly, those data were mined not only for things that would be of interest to us as academics, but for take-home lessons learned, right, that would help improve processes, or at least we would offer them up for consideration to the local peace committee. The BPC's work had impact. In fact, as you see here, a 13-year chieftaincy dispute that had been delayed in court for years was actually resolved approximately 14 months after that local peace committee began their work. Community members committed to ending a conflict donated vehicles to be used in transporting individuals to the court. The opposing factions of the youth unified to end violence surrounding the two political parties, announcing that both groups would accept the chief, whoever it was, that the court ruled in favor of. Since that court ruling, there have been significant changes in the community, including initiating an educational and health fund development efforts, right? That would include contributing to a cleanup campaign, among other things. The BPC has continued to do its work, developing a strong reputation in Bonamon as being agents of peace and peace ambassadors. And individual members of the BPC themselves report feeling a sense of pride and recognition that they've been part of this community building effort. Most importantly, there have been no reports of violence since September 2013. Bonamon taught us some important lessons about how to do engaged scholarship and collaborative peace-building work. Those people inspired what we now call the Purdue Peace Project's relationally attentive approach to conducting engaged communication scholarship. For us, relational means, at core, seeing each other as human beings. Not a novel concept, but one sometimes that I think we sadly forget. Attentive means seeing these efforts as ongoing and requiring close collaboration. And then the 4 components you see here. Engaging in ongoing co-construction together, embracing the recursive relationship between communication choices made when doing collaboration and the impacts achieved from engaged collaboration, needing to be mindful of how we can foster conditions of inclusivity together, and the need to practice reflexivity about a relational orientation, and carefully consider what that really means. Our first point for tonight, everyday citizens can lead and affect social change in profound ways. Our second point was that conflict and tension do actually have transformative potential. Or what I asked myself, how does a group of everyday Liberian citizens come to be designing and implementing one of the first grassroots efforts to combat the Ebola virus? What we initially called the Pen Drivers Project in Liberia began in July 2013 as an attempt to help reintegrate what are called Pen drivers back into civil society in productive ways. Pen drivers are motorcycle taxi drivers. They transport women, children, men sometimes too, throughout Liberia for less money than a regular taxi would cost. Pen drivers have become a key part of the Liberian economy. They are unionized now, and there are approximately 500,000 pen drivers in Liberia. However, the average pen rider makes approximately $3,000 per year. Because of their vulnerable socioeconomic status, pen drivers have historically been used as pawns during political campaigns, paid to incite violence and unrest. And in our preliminary research for this collaboration, we heard a constant theme that pen riders felt like second-class citizens when it came to how they were treated by the police, perhaps due to some of their aggressive behaviors in the past. Perhaps due to the fact that some of these young men were ex-combatants during Charles Taylor's regime in Liberia, and thus they carry the legacy of civil war with them. To be sure, our preliminary research revealed tensions between pen riders, police, and customers, so much so that there were concerns that once again they would be used in the next wave of elections to incite violence. Well, having identified this issue as one that could potentially trigger violence, we then cultivated relationships with relevant actors to see if there would be interest in coming together to engage in dialogue around this issue. Rosalind, the Ghanaian woman who I mentioned before, engaged the police, the Ministry of Transport, pen drivers unions, pen drivers themselves, market women, and other customers. Her conversations eventually yielded an affirmative, that there was interest among the relevant groups in coming together to discuss the tensions and finding a way forward together. But given that Rosalind did not reside in Liberia herself, and that some sort of local presence was absolutely necessary, we invited a local civil society organization called WAMSA, the Women's Movement for Sustainable Development, to work with us. Their executive director at the time was Grace Yaney, who now I'm proud to say is the Liberia Country Director for the Purdue Peace Project. She was someone that Rosalind had worked with before and had a great deal of trust in. We quickly learned that while the actor groups may have been willing to come together in theory, the act of bringing them together was still going to be wrought with tension. The first meeting with representatives from the police and the pen drivers resulted in open hostility. Reminiscent of Linda Putnam's work on negotiation, our lesson learned was that getting to genuine dialogue would sometimes involve what could be called destructive communication. Upon reflection, however, it was that space for airing opposing viewpoints that we believe may have contributed eventually to the parties wanting to work together. The resilience displayed by both sides in sticking to the issue at hand, and our facilitator, Grace herself, who persevered through multiple tense moments, facilitated further space for dialogue. After 2 meetings and several destructive conversations, the police and pen drivers agreed to an after meeting in which additional parties, such as the Ministry of Transport, market women, and others, did eventually come together. The goal of that meeting was to try to agree upon strategies that could be used to prevent violence around this issue, and to create a set of actionable steps that could then be used to realize those goals. The meeting took place in July 2013, and it was the very first time that those particular groups have been invited to participate in a conversation together. Very importantly, just as it did in Bonamon, Ghana, out of that group emerged a local peace committee. This time, 15 dedicated individuals who named themselves the Pen Peace Network. And they committed themselves, again voluntarily, not being paid a dime from Purdue, to making sure the strategies that arose out of the actor meeting came to fruition. I emphasize voluntarily because those dedicated individuals never earn a salary. While we pay for project costs and for transportation and other kinds of things, they are not on the Purdue payroll. The data from this actor meeting pointed to 3 overall strategies they thought could help prevent political violence in Liberia around pen. A multimedia campaign that would try to raise awareness among all actor groups about each other and change attitudes and behaviors that the actor groups would make toward one another. Secondly, organizational strategies that try to do a whole host of things to legitimize pen as an actual profession. And then thirdly, certain changes in policy. Among those three groups of strategies, the multimedia campaign was one that was taking off at the time that this happened. Before Ebola struck, before it became an epidemic in July 2014, members of the research team at Purdue University had traveled to Liberia regularly. We would go every 3 months or so to work with our collaborators, to collect data, right, back and forth, to journey with them. In fact, I was in Monrovia in late May 2014 with a colleague shooting a documentary, trying to capture the beauty of their efforts. And I was again there in early July 2014. But by mid-July, Ebola had become a public health emergency. And you all remember this, right, from a few short years ago. By the end of August 2014, 694 Liberians had died from Ebola. Those were just the official counts. Unknown numbers had succumbed to that virus in counties around the capital city of Monrovia who were not counted. By December 2015, over 4,800 Liberians had lost their lives to Ebola. To try to stop the virus, international aid organizations such as Doctors Without Borders and Liberian healthcare workers worked tirelessly. The Liberian Ministry of Health and Social Welfare collaborated with UNICEF and other organizations to produce public health messages to try to stop the virus's spread. The World Health Organization and the CDC declared Ebola an epidemic. And the U.S. State Department issued a travel warning, strongly encouraging U.S. citizens not to travel to Liberia. The U.S. Embassy in Monrovia ordered the evacuation of all family members and non-essential personnel, and some international airlines just stopped flying in and out of Monrovia. While some aid workers and medical professionals chose to stay, others, like the Peace Corps, ordered their personnel out of Liberia. A country once abundant with U.S. and other international aid workers suddenly saw a flight of human capital. Liberia's president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, pled with the international community to help her nation, one of the poorest in the world. The U.S. government responded by committing military personnel in September 2014 to help build Ebola treatment units. But military cargo planes had difficulty landing at Roberts International Airport as it was the rainy season and the runways were washed out. U.S. troops deployed to Liberia had hoped to build 17 Ebola treatment units by mid-November 2014. Unfortunately, by the middle of October 2014, they were only able to construct one. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, set up a disaster assistance response team in Monrovia. The United Nations certainly did its part, as did a host of other international groups. In the meantime, the Liberian government took really drastic measures to try to contain that virus's spread. For example, it put one community in Monrovia called West Point on lockdown. If you can imagine for just a moment, literally waking up one morning and finding your community surrounded by barbed wire and military personnel so you could not leave. That is literally what West Point community citizens woke up to one morning. The Liberian government was publicly criticized, not only for those actions, but also for not responding quickly enough. It faced intense scrutiny from Liberian citizens. Where was the $350 million of U.S. and other international aid going? Liberian citizens didn't see it coming to them. So much so that Liberia's Nobel laureate, Lema Gobi, warned candidly in an op-ed in the UK's The Guardian magazine, "Now we face a new enemy from within. Liberia is battling a virulence that threatens to destroy all of our progress. The Ebola outbreak has closed all schools, all hospitals are overwhelmed, and airlines have stopped flights in the country. Ebola is resurrecting old traumas for Liberians who survived the war. However, at the same time that those events and those headlines dominated global depictions of the Ebola crisis, and we all saw them, other kinds of stories were playing out. These stories involved everyday Liberian citizens who struggled daily to put food on the table for their children, who lived through 14 years of civil strife from 1989 to 2003, a period in which 250,000 Liberians were brutally killed. Families were torn apart, and a nation-state was demolished. There's our stories of what I would call true commitment and true resilience. The protagonists of these stories exhibit what I've now started calling in my scholarly work, unwavering resilience. By that I mean a perseverance, a boundless energy, and activity toward a shared goal, despite structural, cultural, and material constraints that stand in the way. In this instance, the shared goal these citizens worked toward together was quite literally the survival of themselves, their families, and their friends, fellow Liberians who they had never met before, and as I came to realize as time went on, the survival of their country itself. Although this time, unlike during the 14 years of civil war, where the enemy was visible, this time the fight was against an invisible enemy. The protagonists in this story that I'll talk a little bit about tonight are individuals that you see here. One of them is someone who I will call Gavin. Gavin watched his brother brutally killed by the military during the Liberian civil crisis. He's a motorcycle taxi driver who actually seeks to educate his children. Among them, pictured here, is a woman who I'll call Yolanda. Yolanda is an unmarried young woman. She and her sisters and mother went into hiding in the bush during the Civil War. They survived, but witnessed horrific atrocities against their fellow citizens. One of her biggest dreams right now is to earn her college degree. Yet that requires, in Liberia, having $350 US per semester, something that she does not have. Among them depicted here also is a man I will call Samuel. Samuel was a child soldier in General Taylor's war. Instead of going to school, as children his age did, Samuel was recruited into the army and followed orders. Conceivably, think about this, conceivably, Samuel could have been part of the violence against Gavin and Yolanda's families. Thus, in this photo, the one in the middle, you see individuals who once took up arms against each other and fled from each other, now working together. That in and of itself is pretty remarkable. But what is more remarkable is that together they co-designed and implemented one of the earliest systematic grassroots efforts to combat Ebola. After Ebola hit, I knew none of us from Purdue would be able to travel. U.S. State Department warning aside, I knew my university would be very concerned about risk, right? Risk to us and risk about what happens if one of us would come back to the United States with Ebola. I remember thinking, I'm embarrassed to say now, that meant that the production of new knowledge would have to stop. And now when I reflect on that, I think what a selfish thought that was. In August 2014, at a time when the Liberian government was being heavily criticized, when international aid was having difficulty getting in, when 694 Liberians had already died, something very unexpected happened. I received a Skype phone call, and I vividly remember the conversation I had with Grace that day. She said the Pen Peace Network, that group of pen writers that you met before, had asked her if they could mobilize and redirect their attention to combating Ebola. They felt they were an organized group who came into contact with people regularly as a result of their profession, and they believed that everyday citizens could interact with other everyday citizens in a way that government or well-intentioned NGOs could not. Researchers who study multiple targets of identification might refer to this as feeling as though one's identification with fellow citizen would be more salient than one's identification with government. Indeed, post-civil strife, there is still a lot of uncertainty and frustration between citizens and government in Liberia. And certainly given some of the Liberian government's actions, one could understand where citizens were coming from. We agreed to support the Redirect and Focus, and the Pen Peace Network began working on Ebola prevention. In line with our epistemological foundation, the ideas for how best to approach Ebola prevention came from within that local peace committee. In fact, their co-construction led to a campaign that sought to raise public awareness about the Ebola virus, deliver crucial information about the spread of the disease, as well as preventative measures. They adopted a model of working with and beginning to think a little bit about these days. Dialogic space as cultivating lasting, organizing, and relationships. Across those groups, help them better understand the current situation, which contributed to the development of peace-building strategies. Which leads me to the next point, which is the importance of the invitation. Communication scholars Foss and Griffin once wrote about invitational rhetoric. In work on Latino voters in the US, I once pondered the question of invitations for Latino voters' identifications during political campaigns. But now when I think about our work in West Africa and Central America, I'm reminded of a saying from a movie. I don't know if you all have seen it, but it's called Field of Dreams, right, from the 1980s. And the saying goes something like this: if you build it, he will come. I now find myself thinking, if you invite them, they will join. And the you does not reference me. You, if you invite them, they will join, means other locals on the ground. All of our local peace committees still exist to date, and across collaborations, I continue to hear the following: no one ever asked me to participate before. Allow me to close tonight by reminding you of our two takeaway messages. Everyday citizens can indeed be profound sources or agents of change. And conflict and tension indeed has transformative potential.